The word reached Susanna Marsh over the mercantile counter at Cottonwood Draw, dropped careless as a coin by a freighter shaking snow off his coat. Josiah Pell had come back, folks said, ridden in near dead and holed up alone in that old cabin above the creek, and the doctor 2 towns over could not get through the passes till the storm broke, and by then the man would likely be past doctoring. The freighter said it the way men say a thing that is not their trouble. Susanna's hand went still on the bolt of cloth she had been measuring, and the shears she held came very near to falling. Josiah Pell. She had not spoken the name aloud in 6 years. She had trained herself not to, the way a body trains itself not to press a tooth that aches. And now here it was, laid out on the counter between the lamp oil and the coffee, and behind it, the news that he had come home to Cottonwood Draw to die. Somebody ought to go up to him, the freighter said, already turning away. But that grade's a sheet of ice, and the light's near gone, and a man'd have to be a fool. Or a woman, Susanna said. She did not remember deciding. She remembered pulling on her heavy coat and telling the storekeeper to mind the shop, and gathering into a satchel the things her mother had taught her, the clean linen, the honey and the whiskey, the dried yarrow and the willow bark, the little roll of needles and waxed thread, and she remembered stepping out into a wind that took the breath clean out of her chest. The snow came sideways. The creek road climbed into white. She put her head down and went, because Josiah Pell had once ridden away from her to spare her a hard life, and she would be cursed before she let him die alone in a cold cabin to finish the job. The creek road was worse than the freighter had promised. Below the ford it was only mud and slush, but where it climbed toward the timber the wind had scoured it to blue ice, and Susanna went the last half-mile on her feet, leading the borrowed mule by the bridle, because no sensible animal would carry a rider over such footing. Twice she went down hard, once catching herself on a fence rail, and once on nothing at all, and the satchel spilled and she gathered the little jars back out of the snow with numb fingers, counting them by touch to be sure the honey had not broken. The light bled out of the sky. The cold got down into the seams of her and made a home there. She thought of turning back. She thought it for exactly as long as it took to remember the freighter's careless voice. Somebody ought to go up to him. And then she did not think it again. She climbed. When at last she saw the dark shape of the cabin against the snow, no smoke to speak of at the chimney, no light in the one window, her heart dropped straight through her boots, and she covered the last of the distance at a stumbling run. He knew he was dying, and the knowing did not trouble Josiah Pell half so much as he had expected it to. He lay on the rope bed in the cabin his father had built, wrapped in everything he owned, and still he could not get warm, because the cold was not in the room. The cold was in him, riding up from the wound in his side that had gone bad on the trail 3 days back, a ranger's parting gift from a fight he no longer even believed in. He had come home to Cottonwood Draw for no better reason than that a man wants to die where he was a boy. He had not meant for anyone to know. He had certainly not meant for the one person in all the world he had wronged worse to know. He was thinking of her, when the door blew open. That was the fever, he decided. 6 years and better since he had put her on a stage and told her a lie, that he did not love her, that a ranger's woman was a widow waiting to happen and she deserved better than a grave to tend. And now the fever had gone and conjured her up out of the storm, snow in her dark hair, cheeks whipped red, her mother's satchel in her hand. A cruel trick for a dying man. He almost smiled at it. You, the apparition said, are a stubborn, prideful fool of a man, Josiah Pell, and if you die on this bed, I will never forgive you. It was her voice. Fever did not do voices. Not like that. Josiah tried to sit up and could not. Susanna! He got out. You oughtn't, the grade. I climbed it. She was already crossing the room, dropping to her knees by the bed, pulling back the reeking blankets with hands that did not flinch, though her face went pale at what she found. So save your breath for something worth saying, if you've got any breath to spare, which by the look of this you have not. The wound had festered ugly. Susanna had nursed her mother through her long dying, and had set the leg of more than one careless cowhand. But she had never in her life seen a thing so far gone, in a body still arguing with her. And Josiah Pell argued. Even burning up, even gray. He had breath enough to tell her to leave him, to say he was not worth the ruin of her Sunday coat, to call himself by names she would not have let another soul call him. "Be quiet," she told him, "and hold this lamp steady if you can't be quiet," and she set to work. She had known before she pulled the blankets back that it was bad. She had smelled it from the door, the sweetish rot that meant a wound had turned on its owner. What she had not known was how the sight of him would strike her. This man she had carried in her chest for 6 years, whittled down now to bones and fever, his face gone gaunt and gray as ash, the strong hands she remembered lying slack on the coverlet. For one moment, the fear rose up in her so high she could not move. Then her mother's voice came to her, the way it always did in a sick room. "You can weep after, girl. The work comes first." And Susanna set her jaw and knelt, and the fear folded itself away, and her hands, when she reached for the satchel, were steady. She built the fire up till the little cabin roared with heat. She heated water and cleaned the wound out proper, and when it had to be opened and drained, she did it with her mother's smallest knife held in the flame first. And Josiah bit down on a folded strap and made no sound, and she loved him so fiercely in that moment for his silence that her hands shook, and she had to stop and breathe. She packed it with honey, the way the old midwife had taught her, honey that never spoiled and drew the poison, and bound it clean, and got willow bark and yarrow tea down him a spoon at a time through a night that had no end to it. The fever climbed before it broke. Near midnight, he did not know her. He called her name and reached for a Susanna, who was not the one kneeling right there, the young one, the one from before the stage. And he begged that one's pardon over and over in a cracked voice for a thing he would not name, and Susanna held his burning hand in both of hers and said, I'm here, I forgive you, only stay," though he could not hear it. Outside, the storm threw itself against the log walls all the night long. She did not sleep. She wiped him down with snowmelt when the fever spiked, and piled the blankets on when the shakes took him. And somewhere in the blackest hour of it, she stopped being afraid and grew simply certain, the way she had been certain on the creek road, that she had not climbed that grade to lose him. Toward dawn, the fever broke. She felt it go out of him like a tide, felt the killing heat drain out of his skin under her palm, and Josiah Pell drew one long shuddering breath, and then an easier one, and sank down into a true sleep, the healing kind, and Susanna Marsh put her face down against the rough blanket by his shoulder and wept as she had not let herself weep in 6 years. He woke to gray daylight and the smell of broth and the sight of her feeding the fire, sleeves rolled, hair coming down, and he thought for one clear moment that he had died after all and been given more mercy than he was owed. "Don't," Susanna said, without turning. She had heard him stir. "Don't tell me I shouldn't have come. I've heard it enough from you fevered. I'll not hear it from you sensible." Josiah lay quiet a while. The pain in his side had changed its color, gone from the deep wrong ache of rot to the clean sting of a wound that means to heal. He knew the difference. Every old soldier did. "I told you a lie," he said finally to the ceiling, because he could not yet say it to her face. "On that platform, 6 years back, I told you I didn't love you." "I know it," Susanna said. "I knew it then." She brought the broth to the bed and sat on the stool beside it, and did not offer to spoon-feed him, which he was grateful for, only put the cup in his hands and steadied them with her own. "I have been angry at you for 6 years, Josiah, for deciding all by yourself what kind of life I could bear, as if I were a china cup. As if I hadn't buried my own mother and run a shop and kept myself these 6 years without one soul's help." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "You didn't spare me a hard life. You only made me live the hard one alone." He shut his eyes. "I know it now," he said. "Lying up here dying, that's the whole of what I understood. That I'd called it protecting you, and it was nothing but a coward's way of leaving before I could be left." He looked at her then, made himself do it. "I don't ask a thing of you. You saved my worthless life, and you owe me not one thing further, and I'll say so to the doctor and the whole town. But I'll not lie to you a second time, Susanna, not if I've got the breath. I loved you on that platform. I have loved you every mile of 6 years, And you climbing that grade in the storm is the last thing I've got any right to, and the only thing I've ever wanted." The doctor got through 2 days later, when the passes cleared, and found his patient sitting up and taking soup, and a young woman he half knew, asleep in the chair by the fire, and he examined the wound, and looked at the honey packing, and the clean, neat stitches, and said, whoever had done this had saved the man's life, plain and simple, and he'd not have done it better himself. "She did it," Josiah said. He was looking at Susanna, asleep, worn out, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Everything. She did all of it. There was a day, well into his mending, when she came up the creek road to find him standing at the window watching for her, and she stopped in the yard and looked at him a long while before she went in. He had shaved. He had put on a clean shirt she recognized as his father's, taken from the trunk, and she understood, standing there in the melting snow, that he was courting her, slow and clumsy and grave as a boy at his first dance, and that he did not presume upon a single thing, but waited each day to see whether she would come, and rejoiced each day that she did, and never once let himself act as though her coming were owed. It undid something in her that 6 years of anger had knotted up tight. She went in, and took off her coat, and stayed later than she meant to, and neither of them spoke of it, but they both knew the ground had shifted under them for good. He mended slow through the tail of that winter, and Susanna came up the creek road every day the weather allowed, and some days it didn't, and the town, which had been ready to bury Josiah Pell, watched instead as he learned to walk the cabin, then the yard, then down to the mercantile on her arm, leaning less on her each week, and yet somehow never wanting to let go of her at all. He asked her plainly, when the crocuses came up ragged along the creek, and he could stand on his own 2 feet to do it. He did not kneel. The side would not let him yet. But he took both her hands in the cabin doorway with the spring wind coming up the draw, and he said, "I sent you off once to spare you a hard life, and I was a fool, and I'll not make that mistake again by pretending I'm sparing you now. It'll be a plain life. My ranger days are done, and I've got this cabin and my father's land and 2 good hands, one of them yours if you'll lend it. Marry me, Susanna, not to save me. You've done that. Marry me because the years fell away the minute you came through that door, and I mean to spend what's left of them proving I finally learned better." Susanna Marsh, who had climbed an iced grade in a killing storm rather than let this man die alone, looked at him a long moment. Then she smiled, the old smile, the one from before the platform. "I climbed a mountain in the snow to get to you, Josiah Pell," she said. "You didn't truly think I meant to climb back down without you." They were married in the little church at Cottonwood Draw when the passes were green, and if the whole town came, it was because the whole town had watched a woman ride into a storm to save the man everyone else had given up for lost, and there is no story a frontier loves better than that one. She kept her mother's satchel on a peg by the cabin door all her life, the honey and the willow bark and the wax thread, and every winter when the wind came howling down the draw and the fire threw its light on the log walls, Josiah would look across at her and remember the door blowing open and the snow in her dark hair, and think that he had been wrong about only one thing in all his hard life, that a man could ever spare a woman like her anything, when the truth was, she was the one doing the saving all along.